Question. How do you lose weight?
I was taught that the calories in, calories out, thermodynamics of energy utilization governs most everything. That is, if I'm ingesting less caloric energy than I burn, then I'm going to lose weight. And if I'm ingesting exactly as much as I burn, I'll maintain weight. And if I ingest more than I burn, then I'll gain weight.
Sure, that is the approach you would take. What I'm asking really is, how are you actually physically losing the weight?
So my understanding is that we have different fuel sources in the body: glycogen, which is stored in muscle and liver; body fat, which is stored in mainly white adipose tissue, and which is subcutaneous and around our organs, intravisceral fat; and that we can also use protein as a fuel. And then, as I recall, there's also a phosphocreatine system. And I think you're going to tell me that each of these systems is tapped into on different timescales and perhaps according to different levels of exertion. And I'm certain that what I just said is not exhaustive, but hopefully it is most or entirely correct.
Pretty correct. What's that got to do with fat loss?
At some point, body fat stores, adipocytes, fat cells, are going to start liberating fat as a fuel source. And the stimulus for that, I'm assuming, is going to be that other fuel sources are either depleted, or that the energy and metabolic systems of the body, I don't want to say decide because they don't have their own consciousness,
Sure,
but are signaling in a way that registers that body fat would be the optimal fuel source given how long or intensely a given activity has been performed.
Okay, we have some stuff to clean up there, but we're still not really answering the question. How am I actually losing that body fat?
How is it actually leaving the body?
Correct.
My understanding is that it leaves the body through respiration.
Aha. So now we have some interesting things to talk about. How am I actually losing fat via respiration? What the hell does that even mean? How is something that occupied this physical space on the side of me leaving my body through my mouth? And there's a very clear answer there, right? Which I'm sure you're queued up to. When you take a breath in, you're generally breathing in oxygen, O2. There's some other things, but we'll just stick to oxygen. When you exhale, you're breathing out CO2. The difference between those two is that carbon molecule. Well, one of the things that's important to understand here is all of your carbohydrates, which is that word itself is a carbon that has been hydrated. So it is a carbon molecule attached to a water molecule. It is a simple chain of carbons. Your fat molecules are also chains of carbon. All of metabolism really, in terms of energy production, is simply trying to figure out a way to break those carbon bonds. As a result, we get energy from that. We use that energy to create a molecule called ATP, which is the central source of energy for any living being, right? That carbon is then floating around in free form, which is bad news internally. So we've got to figure out a way to get that carbon out of our system. So all of energy production, all of fatigue management really comes down to this core issue of how are we handling carbon?
Has it ever been explored as to whether increasing the duration or intensity of exhales can accelerate fat loss?
Oh, 100% yes. In fact, that is the only way to go about it. You have two options. You can ingest less carbon or you can expel more carbon. People always say calories in, calories out. It's really carbon in, carbon out. That's what a calorie is, right? Calorie is the amount of energy we get per breaking a carbon bond. So it's really less in, more out. Less in is fairly obvious, whether that comes in any form. And by the way, this is exactly why the percentage of your intake coming from fats or carbohydrates, it doesn't really matter that much. If you look at fat loss, clinical trials, you guys may have covered this when Lane was in here. I'm sure this is something he talks about a lot. It doesn't matter. It's irrelevant because it's not about that. There's nothing magic in those things. They are different. And they have different physiological responses. Everything is different, right? No doubt. But in general, it's just simply about carbon intake. Turns out fat has a lot more carbons per mole than carbohydrates do. So there's more calories per mole in there. So if the physical amount of fat needs to come in as a smaller amount, physical amount of carbohydrates will come in as a larger amount, but you can play any number of very high carb, low fat, What matters? Total calories, right? Again, it's not like the only thing that matters, but you know what I'm saying?
Sure.
Some percentages in the way can go. Fat loss works fantastic. High fat, low carbohydrate. Why? Why do all these things work? Because it's not about that. It's about total intake of carbon, total expo.